Her family forced her to marry her sister's millionaire fiancé in a coma, but what he did after waking shocked everyone. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Today's story is titled, Forced to Marry Her Sister's Millionaire Fiancé in a Coma. What he did after waking shocked everyone. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain tapped softly against the window of the hospital chapel as Clara Evans sat in the last pew, her trembling hands clutching the hem of her faded dress. The scent of disinfectant and lilies mixed uneasily in the air, and her mother's cold voice echoed in her head. "You will marry him, Clara, for the family's name, for your sister." Her sister, Emily, had been engaged to Alexander Reed, a 32-year-old real estate tycoon whose empire stretched from New York to Los Angeles. But a month ago, Alexander's car had skidded off the highway in a storm, leaving him in a deep coma. The wedding was called off, and the tabloids swarmed like vultures. Emily's reputation teetered on the edge of scandal, and their father's company, once funded by Alexander's investments, was drowning in debt. Clara had always lived quietly in the background, an art teacher at a public school, the forgotten daughter who preferred sketchbooks over galas. But tonight, she was being dressed as a bride for a man who could not even open his eyes. "Do not cry," her mother hissed as she fastened the pearl buttons on the borrowed gown. "You are doing what must be done." Alexander's lawyers agreed. "Once you sign the papers, our debts are cleared. You only need to appear married until the doctors decide his fate." Clara stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, pale, composed, trapped. "And if he never wakes up?" she whispered. Her mother's lipstick froze midair. "Then you remain Mrs. Reed, his wife in name, and that is enough." At that moment, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "They are ready in the patient suite." The ceremony was brief. A priest murmured vows beside the hospital bed where Alexander lay motionless, his chest rising and falling beneath the hum of machines. The glow from the monitors painted his skin in pale blue light. Clara's voice trembled as she repeated the words, "For better, for worse, in sickness and in health." Her hand slipped the ring onto his still finger, cold but steady. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw it twitch, but maybe it was just her nerves. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, there was no applause, only the faint beeping of the heart monitor and the rustle of legal documents being signed by Alexander's lawyer. Her mother's satisfied sigh filled the silence. "It is done," she whispered. That night, Clara stayed behind after everyone left. The hospital was quiet except for the rain streaking down the tall windows. She stood by Alexander's bedside, staring at the man whose life had just collided with hers. He looked nothing like the cold, arrogant millionaire she had seen in newspapers. Up close, his face was younger, softer, almost peaceful. "You do not know me," she murmured, her voice breaking. "And I do not know you. But they made me your wife tonight." Her words hung in the air, fragile and lonely. She took the chair beside his bed, folded her hands, and whispered a silent prayer. For weeks that followed, she visited him every day, even though she did not have to. The doctors said there was little hope, but Clara still talked to him, read to him, and played his favorite piano pieces through her phone. Sometimes she caught herself smiling at the thought of him waking up, even though she knew it was impossible. Until one night, 3 months later, the impossible happened. It was just after midnight. The storm outside roared like it had the night of his accident. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair, her head resting near his hand. Suddenly, she felt a faint pressure against her fingers, soft, deliberate. Her eyes snapped open. Alexander's hand moved again. "Alexander?" she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. His eyelids fluttered once, then again. The machines beeped faster, lights blinking. She gasped, leaping to her feet and pressing the call button. Nurses rushed in, the room flooding with movement and voices. The doctor's voice trembled with disbelief. "He is responding after months in a coma." Through the noise and confusion, Alexander's eyes finally opened. For a long, breathless moment, they stared at each other, his gaze dazed, hers full of tears. And in that instant, Clara knew that the lie she had been forced into was about to turn into something far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the quiet hospital corridor, washing away the storm from the night before. Nurses moved carefully around Clara, as if afraid to disturb the miracle that had just occurred. She stood at the doorway of the recovery room, her pulse still racing. Alexander Reed, the man she had married in silence and guilt, was awake. He had opened his eyes only for a few moments before exhaustion took him again, but those seconds replayed in her mind like lightning trapped in a bottle. She remembered the confusion in his gaze, the way his lips parted as if to speak, and the shock of realizing that he had seen her wedding ring on his hand. By noon, the hospital's private security surrounded the floor. Reporters had caught wind of the news. Billionaire heir Alexander Reed wakes from coma after 3 months. Clara felt the weight of it all, pressing down public attention, hidden truth, and a marriage she had never wanted. When Dr. Morgan called her into his office, she braced herself. "Mrs. Reed," he said gently, motioning for her to sit. "Your husband's condition is stable, but his memory may be partial. We will need to go slowly. Avoid overwhelming him." Clara hesitated at the word husband. "He does not know about the wedding, does he?" Dr. Morgan sighed. "Not yet. For now, he believes the accident happened last week. Trauma can blur timelines. It might be better if we focus on recovery first." She nodded, though her stomach knotted tighter. How was she supposed to act like a wife to a man who did not even remember their so-called vows? Later that afternoon, Clara entered the room again. Alexander was awake this time, eyes clear but cautious. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. He studied her for a long moment before speaking, his voice low and dry. "You have been here before." "Yes," she said softly, trying to steady her voice. "Every day." He frowned. "Are you a nurse?" The question hit harder than she expected. She could have lied, but something inside her refused. "No, I am, Clara." He waited, expecting more. When she did not explain, his brows furrowed. "You are my..." "What exactly?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Just then, Dr. Morgan stepped in, rescuing her. "Mr. Reed, let us take things one step at a time. Your memory will return gradually." After the doctor left, Alexander glanced back at her, suspicion flickering in his tired eyes. "Clara," he repeated, testing her name on his tongue. "Why does that sound familiar?" She forced a small smile. "Maybe because you heard it while you were asleep." Over the next few days, Clara kept her distance, helping quietly adjusting flowers, checking the blinds, reading his vitals when nurses were busy. She told herself it was temporary. But every time he looked at her with those puzzled gray eyes, something twisted inside her chest. Then one evening, as the sunset poured gold across the room, he broke the silence. "You know," Alexander said slowly, "I keep seeing flashes, a voice reading to me, someone humming a song. Was that you?" Clara's breath caught. "Yes. You were in a coma. I read to you sometimes." "Why?" She looked down at her hands. "Because you were alone, and I thought maybe you could hear me." He studied her, his expression unreadable. Most people would have given up. "I almost did," she admitted, "but something kept telling me you were still fighting." Ugh. A faint smile curved his lips, the first she had ever seen. "Then maybe you were right." Days turned into weeks. With every therapy session, Alexander regained more strength. He could walk short distances now, his body slowly remembering what it had forgotten. Yet the truth hovered between them, fragile and heavy. The world believed she was his devoted wife. His family, his lawyers, even the tabloids called her Mrs. Reed. But to him, she was still a stranger. One morning, while rearranging the flowers beside his bed, she overheard 2 nurses whispering near the door. "They say she married him while he was unconscious," one murmured. "All for the inheritance." Clara froze, her hands tightening around the vase. The other nurse shushed her, but the words had already landed like stones. Alexander's gaze lifted to meet hers, sharp and uncertain. When the nurses left, silence filled the room. He spoke first. "Is it true?" His tone was calm, but his eyes demanded the truth. She opened her mouth, but the air seemed to vanish. "It is complicated." "Then simplify it," he said. Tears burned behind her eyes. "Your family forced me. My parents owed them everything. They said it was the only way to save what was left of us. I never wanted this, Alexander. I swear." He stared at her for a long, endless moment. Then he turned away, his voice colder than before. So I was a signature on a contract. Oh. She wanted to speak, to explain that she had prayed for him every night, that she had never spent a cent of his money, but her throat locked. The sound of the heart monitor filled the silence between them like a slow, accusing pulse. When she finally walked out of the room, her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman stripped of everything but honesty. She knew that from that moment on, whatever came next would no longer be about survival, it would be about redemption. 2 weeks passed. The autumn air outside the hospital windows had turned crisp, the trees glowing amber and red under the afternoon sunday. Inside, however, the air between Clara and Alexander had grown cold. He rarely spoke to her unless it was necessary, and when he did, his words were polite but distant, like speaking to a stranger in an elevator. Clara continued visiting every day, even though each visit felt heavier than the last. She would bring him books, help with his physical therapy, and make sure he ate, though he barely touched his food. Sometimes she caught him watching her quietly, as if trying to solve a puzzle he could not quite finish. One afternoon, Dr. Morgan entered with a clipboard and a faint smile. "Mr. Reed, you are progressing faster than we expected. I think it is time for you to leave the hospital and continue therapy at home." Alexander's eyes flicked toward Clara. "At home," he repeated slowly. "You mean the penthouse?" "Yes," Dr. Morgan said. "Your legal guardian and spouse can assist you during recovery. I will arrange a home nurse as well." Clara's pulse skipped. She had not stepped foot in Alexander's world before his mansion overlooking the East River, the life she had seen only in magazines. "Doctor, maybe it would be better if his family—" But Alexander interrupted, his tone sharp. "No, they only care about the company, not me." He looked directly at her. "If this marriage is what everyone insists it is, then you might as well come home with me, Mrs. Reed." The words sounded like a challenge. Clara could have refused, but she saw the quiet exhaustion in his eyes. He did not trust anyone, and in some twisted way, she was still the only constant in his fractured memory. So she nodded. "All right." That evening, they drove through the glittering Manhattan skyline. The car pulled up to a glass tower that sliced through the clouds. The penthouse was everything Clara had imagined: floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, art worth more than her entire school salary. But it felt sterile, too clean, as if no one had lived there for a long time. A housekeeper greeted them timidly. "Welcome home, Mr. Reed." And Mrs. Reed. The title hung in the air like perfume neither of them wanted to wear. Alexander limped slightly, leaning on his cane as he surveyed the place. "It seems I built myself a palace but forgot how to live in it," he murmured. Clara followed him quietly. She wanted to say something comforting but held back. That night, they ate dinner in near silence, two people bound by paper, separated by truth. After the meal, Alexander spoke without looking up from his plate. "If we are going to pretend, we should set some rules." Clara's fork froze midair. "Rules? Yes. I do not want any lies, but I also do not want sympathy. You will stay here until I can manage on my own. In return, I will make sure your family's debts are cleared, permanently." She stared at him, unsure whether to feel relieved or insulted. "You think I stayed for money?" He finally met her gaze. "I think you stayed because you had no choice." The honesty stung more than cruelty would have. "Fine," she said quietly. "Then let us call it a truce." Over the following days, Clara tried to keep things professional. She helped organize his medications, handled his physical therapy schedule, and avoided personal questions. Yet, slowly, small cracks began to appear in the wall between them. One morning, she found him standing near the balcony, struggling to hold a coffee cup with his weakened hand. She rushed to steady it. "You should not be pushing yourself yet." He exhaled sharply. "If I cannot even hold a cup, how am I supposed to run a company?" "You will, in time," she said gently. "Strength does not come back overnight." He glanced at her, something soft flickering in his expression. "You talk like someone who has lost and started over." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." That was the first time he laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that filled the cold penthouse with warmth. In the evenings, they began to share small rituals. She would brew tea, and he would read aloud from a novel, his deep voice still rough but steady. They started discussing things beyond therapy, art, music, even childhood memories. For the first time, Clara felt like she was speaking to the man beneath the wealth, not the symbol the world worshipped. But just when peace began to settle, reality returned. One afternoon, Alexander's attorney, Mr. Lawson, arrived with a briefcase. He bowed slightly to Clara, then turned to Alexander. "Sir, there is a matter concerning your estate that requires your attention. It is about the will revision signed before your accident." Clara froze. She had heard whispers about a will before how Alexander's assets would shift depending on his marital status. Alexander's brows furrowed. "What revision?" Lawson hesitated. "You appointed your spouse as the temporary executor of your personal trust until you recovered." The air went still. Alexander turned slowly toward Clara, his face unreadable. "So, legally, she controls my fortune?" Lawson nodded. "Only temporarily. It was part of the protection clause you approved before your accident." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I did not know," she said quickly. "I never touched any of it." Alexander studied her, his jaw tight. "Then it seems I married someone who holds my entire empire in her hands." That night, Clara could not sleep. She sat alone by the window, the city lights blurring through her tears. She had not asked for this life, this house, this name, but fate had placed her here anyway. And now, she realized, the line between obligation and something deeper was fading faster than she could control. The next few days felt like walking on glass. Ever since the lawyer's visit, Alexander had grown colder, distant again, as though the fragile warmth between them had never existed. He spent hours locked in his study, reviewing company reports and legal documents, his cane echoing across the marble floor whenever he moved. Clara tried to give him space, but tension filled every room like fog. She cleaned, cooked, and kept her routine, even though the housekeeper offered to handle everything. It was easier to stay busy than to think about the truth that hung between them, that she held his fortune, his name, and his resentment all at once. One morning, Alexander came out of the study dressed sharply for the first time since his coma. His tailored suit framed his recovering frame, and the confidence in his stride almost hid the faint limp. "There is a board meeting today," he said, adjusting his tie. "It will be my first since the accident. You will come with me." Clara blinked. "Me? Why?" He met her eyes coolly. "Because every investor and journalist already knows you as Mrs. Reed. If you do not show up, they will smell blood in the water." The ride to the Reed Corporation headquarters was silent. Outside, skyscrapers sliced through clouds, reflecting the morning Sunday. Inside the conference room, the air buzzed with whispers and camera clicks. Executives, shareholders, and media reporters turned their attention as Alexander entered with Clara at his side. For the first time, she saw the man the world admired, a leader, sharp and commanding. But when an older board member, Mr. Coleman, leaned forward and said loudly, "We all heard strange things about your sudden marriage, Alexander. Care to clarify how a school teacher became Mrs. Reed overnight?" The room went still. Alexander's expression did not flicker. "My personal life is not up for debate," he said evenly. But the murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered the word gold digger. Clara felt her throat tighten, shame crawling up her neck. Then, without warning, Alexander reached for her hand. His voice rose, calm but firm. "My wife stood by me when no one else did. While the rest of you waited for me to die, she sat by my bedside every single day. If loyalty is something you cannot understand, that says more about you than her." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked again, but this time their flashes felt different. Clara could only stare at him, stunned. It was not just a defense, it was belief. As they left the building, she whispered, "You did not have to do that." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Maybe I did." That night, Clara placed the ring she had once hated on the nightstand and whispered to herself, maybe this was never about contracts after all. Outside, the city lights shimmered like a promise neither of them had dared to make until now. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of quiet piano music drifting from the living room. She followed the melody, her bare feet soft against the marble floor. Alexander sat at the grand piano near the window, his fingers trembling slightly over the keys. The melody was uneven, hesitant, but full of emotion. "I did not know you played," she said softly. He looked up, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Neither did I. My therapist said memory sometimes returns through muscle movement. I suppose my hands remembered before my mind did." Clara crossed the room and stood beside him. The morning sun painted the space gold, and for the first time, there was peace between them. She hesitated, then placed a hand over his on the piano. You will get it all back, maybe even better than before. Alexander's gaze lingered on her face. You talk as if you believe in me. I do, she replied, even when you do not. The silence between them felt warmer now. Something unseen had shifted. Days later, Alexander invited her to attend a charity gala that the company sponsored annually. It is important that we appear together, he said, his tone professional, but his eyes softened when she hesitated. Do not worry. It is not a trap. I just need you there. Clara agreed, though her stomach churned at the thought of facing society's stares. That evening, when she stepped out of the dressing room in a silver gown that shimmered under the lights, Alexander froze mid-sentence. For the first time, he seemed lost for words. You look different, he said finally. She smiled faintly. You mean human? I mean unforgettable. The gala was held in a ballroom glittering with chandeliers. Conversations stopped as they entered together. The whispers began immediately. The mysterious wife, the Coma wedding, the scandal. Clara felt their eyes burn through her, but Alexander never once let go of her hand. When a journalist approached with a microphone, asking how it felt to be the luckiest woman alive, Clara almost laughed. Before she could answer, Alexander spoke instead. Luck has nothing to do with it. Sometimes the right person comes into your life in the most unexpected way. Cameras flashed. The crowd murmured. And for one fleeting second, she forgot that their marriage had ever been a lie. Later that night, after the gala ended, Alexander and Clara stood on the rooftop terrace, the city lights sprawling beneath them. The wind carried the distant hum of New York traffic. He turned to her quietly. For what it is worth, he said, I am glad you stayed. She met his gaze, her heart aching at the honesty in his voice. So am I. In that moment, the contract between them no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the beginning of something real. The days after the gala passed in a quiet rhythm. Alexander returned to work part-time, his strength improving, while Clara began to adjust to a life she never expected. The penthouse no longer felt like a stranger's house. There was laughter now, the faint clatter of coffee cups in the morning, the echo of music in the evenings. One night, after a long board meeting, Alexander came home later than usual. Clara waited in the kitchen, reheating dinner that had gone cold hours before. He looked exhausted but softer, the sharpness in his expression replaced by something almost gentle. You waited, he said quietly. She shrugged, smiling faintly. I figured billionaires get hungry too. He chuckled under his breath and sat across from her. You know, for someone who never wanted this marriage, you act more like a wife than anyone could have imagined. Clara's fork paused midair. Maybe that is because I am not pretending anymore. Huh. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Then Alexander leaned back, studying her carefully. Clara, may I ask you something honest? Of course. When I woke up, before I remembered who I was, before the world came rushing back, I kept seeing your face in every dream. You were always there. Do you believe something like that means anything? Her breath caught. I think, she said softly, that sometimes people find each other before they are meant to. His lips curved slightly, as if the thought comforted him. Then maybe fate had a strange sense of humor. For the first time, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was not forced or polite. It was real, warm, alive. The distance that had once felt impossible began to vanish. But peace never lasted long in Alexander's world. The next morning, the news broke like thunder. A headline flashed across every screen. Reed Corporation insider leak. Secret will clause discovered. By the time Alexander arrived at the office, reporters were already crowding the lobby. Someone had leaked documents proving that his fortune could be legally transferred to his spouse if he remained incapacitated for over 3 months. The timing was too precise, too convenient. He called Clara from his office, his tone tight but calm. Did you see the news? Yes, she whispered, her heart pounding. Alexander, I swear. I know, he said before she could finish. You would not do that, but someone wants to make it look like you did. He turned toward the window, watching the city spin beneath him. This is not an accident. Someone inside the company wants me out, and now they will use you to do it. Clara's voice trembled. What are we going to do? He looked back at her, resolve hardening in his eyes. We are going to find out who set this up, but from now on, do not trust anyone except me. For the first time since their wedding, those words, "trust me," did not sound like a command. They sounded like a promise. The following week, tension hung over the Reed Corporation like a storm waiting to break. Every news outlet replayed the same story, twisting it into scandal. The Coma bride, the fortune thief, the woman who married a dying millionaire, the headlines painted Clara as a villain. Inside the penthouse, she barely slept. Reporters camped outside the building, cameras flashing through the glass doors. Every buzz of her phone made her heart jump. Alexander spent his days in back-to-back meetings, fighting to keep control of his company and reputation. But late each night, when he came home, his anger melted into quiet exhaustion. One evening, Clara stood by the balcony, watching the city lights blur through her tears. "Maybe it would be easier if I left," she said softly. "You do not need me to make this worse." Alexander turned from his desk, his voice steady but sharp. "You think walking away will fix this? That is exactly what they want. Whoever leaked that clause is trying to break us apart." She looked at him through the reflection in the window. "Why would anyone go this far?" He stepped closer, his expression darkening. "Because I cut too many people off when I rebuilt the company. Old partners, investors, even family." His voice dropped lower. "I think it was Nathan, my cousin. He always believed he deserved everything I have." Clara's breath caught. "Then he is the one who leaked it?" "I cannot prove it yet," Alexander said, his jaw tightening. "But I will. Until then, we keep up appearances. We face them together." She turned to him fully now, her voice breaking. "Together? After everything I did to you?" He met her eyes. "You did not betray me, Clara. You saved me. The only mistake I made was not seeing it sooner." The weight of his words hit her harder than any accusation could. For the first time, she realized that despite the chaos, despite the lies and contracts, she trusted him completely. And as thunder rolled across the skyline, Alexander reached for her hand, their reflection merging in the glass. The battle ahead would be brutal, but they would face it side by side.